your first sale and how important that is. So, my name is Kyle Hiersche. I am the host of the show. I have founded over 10 businesses, some of which do multi million dollars per year, and we can help you get to that next level if you would like. So, today we're going to be talking about your first sale. Maybe you've already had your first sale. We'll talk about the importance of it and what we can do from there. Or maybe you're brand new and haven't made your first sale, and this is definitely something that you want to go over. So, first, let's talk about how important that first sale is. Your first sale is what changes your business from being an idea to being an actual business. I would say that your first sale is what creates your actual company. I wouldn't say that you're necessarily a real company until you've made your first sale. Now, there are some larger companies that maybe get investments that, maybe a long-term play. But for the most part, especially right now, when we're talking about independent businesses, founding without funding, using these principles to build a new business, typically your business doesn't really exist until you have your first sale. That's why it's so important to make your first sale. Now, when you make your first sale, once you make your first sale, it's going to change your mindset. And everything that you're doing in your business is going to change. And that is a very important part of the process of bringing your company from an idea into a real business, into something that can generate you money. So, first off, to get that first sale, we're going to put out our product or service into the marketplace. We need to get it in front of people. We need to get feedback from those people and change our offering if need be. And when I say get it in front of people, I mean get it in front of a mass amount of people. We're going to be, using every tool at our disposal. Now, in order to do that, typically you're going to need to spend a little bit of money. Either that or you're going to have to put in a lot of work. So what we're talking about here is either putting out your product or service to the marketplace via ads. Typically that would be meta ads, where again, you can spend as little as $1 a day just to get people in the door and get the feedback from them and possibly get some sales. Or you're going to be putting in a lot of work and effort. So you're going to be, putting in a lot of time, whether it's on, LinkedIn or some other platforms, messaging people, whether it's going out there and meeting people, sending out emails, making cold calls, whatever the situation is. To get your product or service in front of people in the beginning, you're going to need to put in either money or time. So you're going to have to invest something on your own. Now, once you get your product or service in front of enough people for somebody to purchase it, that's when everything changes. And included in that everything is your mindset as an entrepreneur. So now you've had somebody actually purchase your product or service, and now you have to shift to actually providing that service and getting the feedback from that, and then optimizing your product or service to be able to be profitable once you sell more. Now, once you've sold more, you've got that process down, you've increased your efficiency of delivering that product, of selling that product, of fulfilling those orders, whether it's a product or service. Now you can maximize that profit margin, and then and only then can you scale it up and actually throw fuel on the fire to take that product or service to the next level by advertising and putting in more work to get it in front of more people. Now that your service is down, it's systemized, and your your profit margin is as big as it needs to be to carry this on. So let's talk about why it's hard for most people to make their first sale. Most people do not ever get their product or service out to the marketplace. I would say that probably most business ideas never actually get executed. Have you ever talked to somebody and they say, I had that idea? When you're talking about a new product or service that's out there, maybe it's very popular, the classic saying of, oh, I had that idea a long time ago. Well, it's not about the idea. It's about the execution of that idea. So I think fear of failure is really what takes a lot of people out of the race before it even starts, but also lack of knowledge of knowing what tools that you have at your disposal, which is what we talk about with founding without funding. A lot of people say, oh, I had that idea, but I have no investor, or I had nobody to help me accomplish it, or I had no money to accomplish it. Well, nowadays you don't really need much. You're going to need to invest a little bit of time and probably money into it. But at the end of the day, that idea that you say that you have, that you think is going to be the next thing, don't let that pop up later and you say, I had that idea a long time ago. It's about getting out there and executing it and getting it in front of clients. And then again, once you do, at that point, your mindset can shift to actually delivering that product or service, optimizing it, raising the profit margins, and then scaling it up. And now you're not going to be sitting around a year or two later saying, I wish I did that. I thought of that a long time ago. You're going to say, hey, I'm ahead of the game. There's competition in this now, but I thought of it a long time ago. I put that thought into action and executed it. And now I'm well on my way to the top before the competitors have even started. So let's talk about some of the mistakes that I think founders make when they make their first sale. And I think, in order to get to that first sale, you need to really use the MVP, the minimal viable product, to get your service out in front of people. I think that overbuilding instead of selling is what stops a lot of people from getting to the marketplace, thinking about building out the entire product, every single detail. At the end of the day, get out what you can, see if people are biting, see if people are interested, and then adjust what you're building to what people are interested in and what they're going to purchase. I think another, mistake that some founders make is that, they're creating products without validation and going into the whole process of the product or service. Let the marketplace validate the most basic idea that you can bring to the market. And then again, you can break that down once you've made your first sale, figure out how to execute actually providing that product or service, get that to the actual customer, get that feedback, continue making sales, optimize the process. And then at that point, you can scale up once you have the correct profit margins and can pour fuel on the fire with advertising or sales reps or whatever it is that you need to get your product or service out to the marketplace even more. All right. Now, I think a lot of people's products or services, when they first bring them to the marketplace, tend to be too complicated. I think as founders, we get so involved in this great idea that we have that we kind of lose vision of the fact that it has to be presented in a simple way to our potential customers or clients. And so we can get so involved in, it'll be this and it can do this and it'll have all these features, when really we need to be thinking about what's the clearest and easiest way I can get the value of this product or service across to a client. And a lot of the times we're only going to have a split second to do that, whether it's them scrolling past an ad on social media, whether it's getting them on the phone for a second, getting somebody on the phone, especially with a cold call or even a call from a lead that comes in that's opted in. It's not easy to catch their attention and keep them on the phone. So it's usually a very brief amount of time. So as founders, as entrepreneurs, as people that are building out products and services, we need to keep in mind that although we may have a lot of complicated desires on the back end and all these features we want to build out, we still have to bring it to the marketplace in a very clear and simple way to get the value of this product or service across. So don't go too far into the weeds on every little detail and building out all these different features. Focus on a nice, clear, concise way to get the core value of your minimal viable product, your basic service or product out there to the people. And that way they can understand the offering and they can purchase the offering. And once people start purchasing the offering, then you can go from there and build out more features and more ways to sell your product or service. All right. So when it comes down to picking that product or service, obviously these are just my opinions. There's a million ways that you can do this, but I would say to focus on something simple. Again, something where you're solving a very simple problem in a simple way. That is the easiest way to make your first sale. If you're making things very complicated, if you have a product or service where somebody needs to go through an hour-long webinar in order for them to purchase it, or they have to, go through all of these different steps, that's probably not the best product or service to get out there to make your first sale. I would keep it very simple. I would solve a simple problem with a simple solution, and I would have a relatively low price point, especially because at this point, you probably don't have proof in the marketplace, and you probably don't have a lot of ratings on whether it's Google or Facebook or anything like that. You're probably not a member of the Better Business Bureau yet. So at the end of the day, you probably lack a little bit of credibility in the beginning because you don't have those sales, that social proof. And so you want to keep your price point low, something that people are willing to take a chance on with a new company, something that they feel comfortable of, hey, if this doesn't work out, not a big loss. I don't necessarily know if this is the biggest company, the most legit company. I haven't necessarily seen social proof of it, but if I waste my $20, $40, $90, whatever it is that they feel comfortable with, at the end of the day, it's going to make them, purchase that product a lot easier if they feel comfortable with that price point. Also, using things in the beginning like PayPal, that definitely makes people feel comfortable with paying as opposed to just straight debit or credit transactions through, maybe it's Stripe or whatever the payment processor is. A lot of people know that PayPal somewhat acts as a mediator more so than the credit card companies if there is a chargeback. PayPal is more of a escrow when it comes to that situation, and it's very easy for sellers to get their money taken back if they can't provide clear proof that they provided that product or service. So a lot of the times when you're newer, it's easier to make sales when you're using PayPal other than a direct credit card processor because people trust it a little bit more. They know that if they have a problem, they can make a claim in a dispute with PayPal, and it's going to actually be a thorough process that is very customer oriented, making sure that if the seller does not provide the exact proof that is needed, they provided the exact products or service that they advertise to the client, then the buyer will win that dispute and the seller will be out not only the money, but also a chargeback fee. So as the seller of the product or service, it's very important that you do your job and also have proof of doing your job, because what you don't want to do is actually provide the product or service to the client and then end up having to give the money back and pay a $25 or whatever it is chargeback fee. So now you're out your product or service, whatever cost that you had to provide that, the time, the cost, and then you're out $25 extra to the negative because there was a chargeback. So, make sure that you provide, that you have proof of service or product delivered that you can provide. But again, that's great to hold yourself accountable as well. So I would recommend using, PayPal in the beginning because it makes people feel a little bit safer to pay a company, especially if they haven't heard of you yet, if you don't have a bunch of great ratings yet, maybe you have no ratings yet on any of the, Google or Yelp or, any of the other platforms where they can kind of go verify that you've provided a quality product or service to people in the past. I would definitely recommend that. So let's talk about a few of the other factors in your new product or service that you're taking to the marketplace to make your first sale. So one of the great things about making your first sale as an entrepreneur is that it boosts your confidence. I talk about it all the time, the miracle of making your first sale in the marketplace, that the market has responded, that a client or customer has responded by purchasing that product, and it validates your business, your product or service. And so one of the great things about the actual first sale of your company is it boosts your confidence, which can take you to amazing heights as opposed to struggling to even find your first sale. That's a very frustrating place to be in, trying to figure out what that trigger is to make somebody buy that product or service. But you got to make sure you get it out to enough people to have enough sample size before you start changing things. You need to get it in front of people in each form before you start changing and adjusting things. Now, again, if you get feedback from those potential clients or customers saying, yeah, I didn't purchase it because it was too expensive, or I didn't purchase it because of this and that, then you should be adjusting your product or service based on that feedback. But you want to make sure that at each iteration of that idea, product or service, that you give that iteration enough time to get in front of enough people to be able to determine whether it works. Because you might have a product or service that some people think is too expensive, but if you give it enough time, and especially if it's on the expensive side of things, it's going to take a little bit more time for people to purchase it typically. So if you have that product or service in the way that you're presenting it, just make sure you get it in front of enough people to determine whether it's going to work or not. Take that feedback, and then once you've got it in front of enough people, waited for enough time, followed up with them, then at the end of the day, it's time to switch the offering, adjust it, and then get it in front of more people. But I think the biggest thing is to make sure you get it in front of enough people before you start changing it, and make sure that you're keeping track of this. Keep this data separate. These should be separate ad campaigns. They should be separate results. They should be in your CRM tagged separately so that you understand who came from where. And especially if you're doing different iterations of the same, product, service, or idea, you need to know which one was working before you start changing everything. And once you do change everything, you need to be able to look back and say, okay, these are the 3 iterations that we tried. 1 person bought it out of this, 5-person bought it out of this iteration, and 0 people bought it at this iteration. So obviously we need to go with the 5. But if you're just willy-nilly changing things and not keeping track of it, you're going to be even in a worse spot than you were before when nobody was buying it. If you can't figure out who was buying it, why. That's very important, to keep track of everything and make sure that you know your conversion rate at each iteration of that idea, product, or service, so that you can make the best decision going forward. So once you've made your first sale, not only does your confidence boost, but your ideas get a lot clearer because you're seeing things happen. You're seeing that somebody purchased it at this iteration with this pitch, and you're seeing probably the reasons why they did. You're getting some more feedback from your clients or customers. So not only does it boost your confidence to make your first sales, but it just kind of clears everything up and gives you that vision of, okay, this is what somebody's done so far. Now this is where I want to take it. It may be in a different direction than when you first started. And so that's why a lot of clarity comes once you make your first sale of, this is how I made that first sale. This is the avenue that it came from. This is how it happened. It was a phone call, or it was a ad that they clicked on, or whatever it is. You're going to be a lot more clear on the direction that you're going to take that product or service. Now that these first sales are coming in, you're seeing where they're coming in, why they're coming in, the pitch that you were giving for the sales that are coming in, the feedback from the people who have purchased or not purchased. So there's a lot of clarity that comes with that first sale, along with the confidence. And when you have that confidence and that clarity, that can take you a long ways. Take that confidence, take that clarity, put that work into it, and you're going to come out a lot better on the other end. All right. And another thing that's great about making your first sales is you no longer have to wait on anything. Not only do you not have to wait on an investor or funding like we always talk about, but you don't necessarily have to wait on you being able to invest money either, because those sales should at least generate enough to start paying the bills of the company. So that's your first goal, is to stop having to put in money yourself. And once you do that, that's a great first step. You might not be profitable as a business yet. You might have to reinvest everything, but at least you didn't have to keep putting money out of your pocket, whether it's to cover the basic expenses of running the company, having, the different programs and CRM and stuff like that, running ads, so at the end of the day, the first step is to make those first sales and try to make it so that you can stop investing in the expenses as well as ads out of your pocket. And that's going to give you a lot of relief. It's going to give you a lot of confidence, saying, now I don't, have just a hobby and a side hustle. I now have an actual business that's up and running, making sales, paying for itself. And now I just need to figure out how to take it to the next level, how to increase my sales, decrease my expenses, increase my profit margin, and then from there increase my ad budget to scale it up to infinity, which is one of the great things about business nowadays in this age of being able to find the product or service that works, find the profit margin that works, and then boost those ads instantly, where you can go from spending $100 a day on ads to spending $10,000 a day on ads. And as long as your system is working and your profit margin allows it, you can scale to infinity. It's a beautiful time in business. Okay, let's go ahead and take some questions. You can always drop questions there in the chat. We are streaming this live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, X, YouTube, Twitch, Kick, all of the different streaming platforms. So feel free to drop any questions there. I also have some questions here that were sent to me. So let's see here. Let me pull up these questions. All right, so we have a question here from Jake. How do you even get your first sale when nobody knows who you are yet? Again, I would recommend using a little bit more well-known product or service, not necessarily something brand new that you're bringing to the marketplace. And I would keep the price point low, because with the price point low, it can kind of overcome the fact that they don't know your brand yet, that they might not be able to find reputable reviews on your brand. So it needs to be a price point that people are comfortable with possibly losing out on that money if you don't provide the right product or service. And then again, I would probably use a payment processor like PayPal that makes people feel more comfortable with spending that money, because they know PayPal has an extensive dispute process where they're typically going to side with the customer unless the seller can provide very concrete evidence of providing that product or service to the level that they advertised. Okay. Question from Talia. I'm scared to charge money because what if people say no? How do you get past that? So if you're scared to charge money for your product or service, you need to think about the value that it's providing. If you're not that confident that you're providing enough value, then I would change your product, service, or offering. You should be very confident that what you're coming to the marketplace with provides enough value and solves someone's problem enough for them to pay for it. And if it doesn't, then you want to change that and make sure that you feel very confident that it's providing that solution to that problem or that value that you're pitching to people. So as long as you feel comfortable with that, I wouldn't worry about it. And if nobody pays for it, you're going to see that. As long as you start getting it out in front of people, if nobody's buying it, you need to adjust it. And so I think that kind of all works itself out as long as you're willing to put in the work to, get it in front of enough people. Okay, question from Chris here. The question is, how do you know what to sell first if you have 5 different ideas? Well, I would say pick one, that's for sure. And I would say to pick the one that, again, probably the lower price point, probably something that people feel comfortable with, probably not the radical new idea that you have, until maybe you have a little bit more footing, maybe a little bit more SEO to where people search you and find you easily and find reviews on you, whether it's on Google or Facebook or any platform, Yelp, anything that has reviews, that's going to help. So I would say for your first product or service, put something out there that's at a lower price point. And if you have 5 different ideas, I would think about the one that people would be most comfortable purchasing. If it's your first product or service that you're putting out there, that's a big part of it. Is this something that people feel is worth, possibly not getting the best product or service because you are a brand new company or a brand new product or service? So be mindful of that. Okay, we have a question here from Ariana. Is it better to start cheap just to get a sale or charge what it's actually worth? Yeah, I would start with cheap, right? Because you don't necessarily know what it's actually worth until people are purchasing it. It's not worth anything until somebody's paid for it. So I would say to definitely start with something cheap as your first product or service That way people feel more comfortable purchasing it. And you can always raise the price. This comes back to testing, to A/B testing, to making sure that you have the proper ad system set up, the proper tracking, the proper organization in your CRM. All of these things will allow you to test different price points for the same product. And so when you're in the beginning, really what you want to do is just get that proof that somebody will pay something for it, and get that confidence that somebody will pay something for it. And then at that point, you can always raise the price once some cash flow is coming in. But cash flow is king. The sale, somebody being triggered to pay for it, and you can always raise the price later. But I would keep the price point low in the beginning. Okay, we have a question here from Marcus. What if I already tried selling something once and nobody bought it? Do I keep pushing or switch ideas? So if you've already been trying to sell something and nobody's purchasing it, I would make sure that you've got it in front of enough people. I would say typically one of the biggest problems is that people will get people into their system from ads or whatever the situation is, and then they won't follow up enough. And so what I mean by that is typically calling them. That's one of the biggest things that people miss in the process. Yes, you might have the automated system, like one that we could help set up for you, that brings people in through the ads, has the funnel, puts them in the CRM, automatically sends them email, text, all that kind of stuff. But are you following up with a phone call? That makes a big difference. Are you following up with more emails, more texts, reaching out to people? So, that feedback that you're getting from that process is going to help you determine whether you should switch ideas. Now, before you change your whole idea or try to bring a completely different product or service to the market, if it's not working as it is, I would try a different iteration of it. I would try to change the features that are being offered, maybe change the way it's being offered, the bullet points that are on the different advertisements, the designs, the wording. These are things that you want to try before you say, hey, this idea doesn't work at all. Let's switch to a completely different new idea. Give that idea, that product or service, a chance by getting it in front of enough people in one way. And then if that's not working, get it in front of enough people in another way, and, different, iteration of the product or service with different features, and or presenting it in a different way to potential clients or customers. Don't just give up because the first iteration of that idea, product, or service doesn't work. Make sure you give it a chance before you move on to a completely different product or service. Okay. We have a question here from Nina. The question is, how do you ask for the sale without feeling awkward or salesy? So how do you ask for a sale without feeling awkward or salesy? Well, to tell you the truth, most of the products or services that I typically put out there and deal with, you don't necessarily have to sell it. And a lot of products or services or businesses are just like that. You don't necessarily have to be salesy, but what you need to do is get the product or service in front of people. So my biggest thing is not having sale callers that actually make sales. My biggest thing is just having people call to get the information to them. And that's also a great way to do it, because you can have people that don't need to know how to sell and don't need to know every single detail behind the product or service to make calls. So you can typically do this with like a virtual assistant, where their main point of the call is to call and say, hey, you signed up for more info on this product or service, just reaching out to make sure you got that information. We sent you an email and a text message with the info, and there's more information on the website. Did you get the email, text message? Would you like me to resend you the email that has all the information? Would you like me to text you the link again so you can see the information on the product or service? So to tell you the truth, typically, some businesses are very sales oriented and you might need some salespeople to hit the phone. But typically what I'm doing is getting that product or service in front of people, sending them all of the information that they need to make that decision, and then following up with phone calls, not necessarily to push them in a salesy way, but following up with phone calls just to make sure they got the information. Especially nowadays with how much info people are bombarded with, you need to make sure that they got the info and that they saw it, and you need to remain top of mind. But you don't necessarily need to be salesy. Just make sure that they got the information. And then if they have further questions, if that caller is not necessarily a salesperson, just have them take a message and have an actual salesperson give them a call if they do have specific questions that person who initially called them couldn't answer. So I love that system of just getting it in front of people. And then the callers don't necessarily have to be highly paid, highly trained salespeople. They can just check in and say, hey, just making sure you got the information. And if you do have further in-depth, you up with one of our staff members that can help you with that. Okay, another question here coming from Devin. Does it count as a real business if your first sale comes from somebody you already know? Does it count as a real business if your first sale comes from somebody you already know? I think it does. I just think that the marketplace hasn't necessarily showed you yet. Because remember, the marketplace is what's going to determine if you're going to be able to really make future sales, because somebody who you don't know purchased that product or service when you put it out to the marketplace. So having somebody you do know purchase it is great. It gives you a little bit of hope and a little bit of, momentum in the right direction. But really, you need to get out there in front of people that you do not know personally and see if they're going to respond to that product or service. So again, the marketplace is going to determine that, and somebody you know is not necessarily the marketplace, but it's a great thing to do. Get some cash flow coming, get some momentum in the right direction. Most importantly, get their feedback on the product or service, why they wanted to purchase it, apart from the fact that they know you. Once they did purchase it, how was it? Did you provide what they thought you were going to provide? So it's a great thing to make some sales to some people that you do know, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the marketplace has responded to it. So you still need to get out there and make that quote unquote first sale, which is to the market, which is going to validate the idea, the product or service, and that way you can sell it to more people in the marketplace who do not know you. Another question here. We have a question from Olivia. This will be the last question that we do. Olivia's asking, how long should it take to get your first sale before you know something's wrong? So how long should it take to get your first sale? I can't really tell you that. Definitely depends on the product or service that you're bringing to the market. And it depends on how many people you get it in front of and how quickly. So if you're spending, I like to test things at $10 a day on, advertising platforms, again, something like Meta or Google, whatever it is. I think when I put out a new product or service, even a new iteration of an existing product or service, when you want to test it, I say $10 a day is kind of the minimum to start getting that feedback. So if you're putting $10 a day behind it, it shouldn't take very long for you to see, what the cost of conversion is, what it's taking for people to purchase that product or service. And I would say after a month, if you're spending $10 a day and you have the automation set up to automatically email them and text them the info, and you're following up with phone calls to make sure they got that information and all that kind of good stuff, I would say that after a month, it's time to start thinking about a different iteration of that product or service or presenting it in a different way. But if you're only spending $1 a day, $2 a day, $5 a day, it might take longer than that. If you're not following up with phone calls, it's going to take even longer than that. So it's really going to depend on how you're getting it out to the market, how you're getting it out in front of people. But I would say that typically my rule of thumb would be to spend $10 a day, make sure you have all the automated things going on and make sure you're putting them into a CRM and tagging them properly and all that kind of good stuff, following up with phone calls. And then after a month, if that doesn't work, I would start changing the approach, whether you're changing the features of the product or service or you're changing the way that you're presenting that product or service to the customers in the marketplace. And again, make sure you're tracking it. Make sure you know which people came in from the old ads, which people are coming in from the new ads, and make sure that you can go back and look at that data to know what's working, what's not working, what to increase, and what to cut out, because that is everything. If you're doing everything I'm saying, but you're not keeping track of it properly, you might as well not be doing anything because you're not getting the data you need to make the correct decisions. All right. With that being said, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for the questions. Appreciate it. Go ahead and DM me any questions you have at Kyle Hiersche or at Founding Without Funding. More than happy to answer everybody's questions in the future. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you tomorrow. We do stream this live, 12 p.m. Eastern.